There are concepts that are specific to secondaries, such as the purchase price adjustment, the concept of excluded obligations. I'm also thinking about ECI and withholding tax. All these points need to be properly addressed in the documentation. Warranty and indemnity insurance shifts the liability of the seller in a transaction to an insurance product. So typically, the sponsor is expected to roll over at least 100% of the crystallized carried interest into the continuation fund, and sometimes even more.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Women of Secondaries, produced by SecLink and hosted by yours truly. My name is Kristina Kulikova. I'm the VP on the LP advisory side of Setter Capital, and I'm absolutely privileged to host Women of Secondaries, where we cast light on some of the powerhouse women driving this market. If you missed our prior episodes, make sure to check them out on Secondary Link's video and podcast section, YouTube, Spotify, or catch short snippets of the discussion on Secondary Link LinkedIn page. On this episode, I'm chatting with the head of secondaries for Europe at one of the world's most prominent law firms, Skadden, who just celebrated their 75th year in business last year, with offerings spanning 4 continents across 21 countries and growing. I'm very excited to welcome a seasoned legal professional with more than 18 years' experience as a transactional lawyer, with 12 of those years being focused on secondaries. Now, head of secondaries for Europe and a counsel in the investment management group at Skadden, welcome Delphine Jaugey. Hi, Delphine.
Hi, Kristina.
I hope I got your last name right.
Yes, it was perfect. Thank you.
Excellent. Now, Delphine, I'm very, very excited to have you on the show. You have some incredible accolades, experience, and I think really a holistic view of the secondary market. And I'm very thrilled to chat with you today. So thank you for joining us. Now, to fill in our audience, for those that may not have known you, over the last decade, Delphine worked on secondary transactions representing in total around 20 billion in transactional volume. She's represented some of the largest secondaries investors in the market on all types of LP-led and GP-led transactions, as well as preferred equity transactions and bespoke liquidity solutions. In fact, when Delphine started doing secondaries in 2012, she worked on the largest bilateral secondary transaction ever completed globally at the time. And then in 2018 and 2019, she acted for the lead investors in the largest continuation fund in Europe at the time. In fact, some of the secondary transactions she advised on over the years also won Secondaries Deal of the Year in Europe. With all that incredible background, Delphine, how did you get into, or how did you end up in secondaries? And perhaps it'd be great for the audience to learn about your recent transition to Skadden.
Sure. So it was a sliding doors moment. I started as an M&A lawyer in 2006. And in 2012, I had the opportunity to join another law firm. But the first interview I got was with partners in the funds team. Initially, I thought it was a misunderstanding because I was not a funds lawyer, and I even canceled the interview. But they were looking for someone to join the funds team to do private fund formation and secondaries. And on the secondary side, they were interested in my M&A background. So secondary sounded very interesting. So in 2012, I transitioned from M&A to private fund formation and secondaries, and I never looked back.
Oh, we're glad that the industry pulled you away from M&A and into secondaries. Now, given your background, I can't wait to get your take on the various subjects we've prepared for today's chat. So maybe we can get right into it. When you started, as you said, back in 2012, secondary market volume was, I think, under 30 billion at the time. And now this year we're projected to hit likely over 130 billion in 2024. So given that massive growth and obviously the duration that you've been in the market, how have you seen the market evolve from particularly a transaction type standpoint over the years?
Yeah, so when I started doing secondaries in 2012, it was mainly LP portfolio sales, although at the time we were already seeing different types of secondaries. And I would say that the stigma attached to the traditional secondary transactions had already disappeared. And then around 2015, we saw an acceleration of GP-led transactions, and these transactions quickly evolved from tail-end funds to experienced managers selling high-performing assets. In the meantime, preferred equity transactions also developed to become another strategic tool to provide liquidity, initially at fund level, and then more recently to provide liquidity to investors as an alternative to selling their portfolio of LP interests. We also see a bespoke liquidity solutions, and very soon we could see the first continuation fund of a continuation fund.
Now, being the agent in the room, we of course get involved with the transfer process and we see the legal documents fly back and forth, but you're the one that's driving these deals to completion. And, clearly there's been innovation and wider adoption in the market of the various types of transactions. And I'm curious, has the increased creativity in secondary market transactions made the legal aspect of a trade more complex, or the opposite side where the increase in volume helped standardize terms, documentations, processes, etc.?
The answer is both. The increase in volume has definitely helped with standardization, first in LP-LEDs and then in GP-LEDs, which is a natural evolution of the market. At the same time, there is a lot of innovation in this market, which means that the terms and the structures continue to evolve. And with a trend towards more specialization and the arrival of new entrants focusing on concentrated GP-led transactions, GP-leds have become more complex, especially on the M&A side.
Yeah, and do you feel like the more they're more complex, the more creativity there is in transactions, the more we will have specialists focused on each type of transaction, or it's going to become more of a standard?
Definitely a trend towards specializations. And on the M&A side, what we see is a growing use of M&A technology in continuation fund SPAs. So, for instance, with respect to the purchase price adjustment mechanism, we see a broader M&A style definition of leakage to prevent extraction at the level of the portfolio company. We see deferred purchase price and earn-out mechanisms being used to bridge the valuation gap. Earn-outs can also be used to enhance alignment with the sponsor. We see additional due diligence and additional representations and warranties at the level of the portfolio company, especially in single asset transactions. We also see additional governance rights in favor of lead investors at the level of the portfolio company, and of course the rise of W&I Insurance.
Yeah, I was going to actually ask about that because that's, the goal of, I think, every seller, buyer, advisor, lawyer is to get the transaction to the finish line. But I'm sure there's numerous nuances that arise that can make the transaction go south at the 11th hour, right? Whether it's like indemnities, withholding tax, I don't know, clawbacks, recallable distributions, the list goes on. And so I would love to get your take on what's driven the rise of the W&I kind of warranty and indemnity insurance, and does this type of insurance have a place in secondary deals? And then also maybe who are the likely early adopters of this tool?
Yeah, so definitely. Warranty and indemnity insurance shifts the liability of the seller in a transaction to an insurance product. And we are definitely seeing accelerated use of W&I insurance in continuation funds. Last year, the majority of the continuation funds that we saw in Europe used W&I insurance. This is something that is still relatively new on the LP-led side, but it's picking up. In continuation fund, W&I insurance eliminates the need for escrow and holdback arrangements that were seen historically in these transactions, because the GP is on both sides of the transaction. But if you use W&I insurance as a sponsor, it allows the selling fund to cap your liability at $1 in the SPA and distribute the purchase price proceeds to the existing investors at closing. It also protects the relationship between sponsors and secondaries investors because in case of a claim, the recourse is against the insurer.
Okay, so pivoting a little bit, as you mentioned, there obviously has been a massive rise in GP continuation funds being done, and more we see secondary firms such as, Lexington, of course, Blue Owl, and even traditional PE firms like Leonard Green, I think, just set up GP-led vehicles. So there's no doubt that the push in capitalization will only make this market grow. But from a legal perspective, I'd love to get your take on perhaps what should a GP be mindful of when doing a continuation vehicle? What should they be thinking?
So yes, to be successful, a continuation fund needs to be done for the right reason and with the right process. It is an additional tool in the toolkit. For a sponsor, it is a great way to continue to own an asset and maximize its value instead of selling it to a competitor while providing liquidity to its existing investors. But it needs to be done with the right process. In terms of process, so because the sponsor is on both sides of the transaction, there is an inherent conflict of interest which needs to be properly managed. This means that, for instance, very often the governing documentation of the selling fund will say that if you want to do a continuation fund, because this is a related party transaction, you need the approval of the advisory committee. Another way to mitigate conflict of interest is to provide a fairness opinion or third party valuation to your existing investors. This is a legal requirement now for registered investment advisors, but this is actually something that we had already seen in practice, and it had already been adopted even before the legislation came into force. Transparency with your investors is also key. And regarding the election process, you need to give enough time to your existing investors to review your proposal and to return the election form. It's usually 30 days as recommended by ILPA. And finally, I would say alignment of interests is also very important for buyers. So typically, the sponsor is expected to roll over at least 100% of the crystallized carried interest into the continuation fund, and sometimes even more.
Yeah, and there's some sponsors that opt not to do that, right? They not roll over all their carry into the CV or a more major portion of the carry. How do you find that those types of deals are perceived? Is it just less LPs decide to roll over in that case? They don't see the alignment. They don't see, the right incentivization on behalf of the GP, or what's typically the success rate of those types of CVs?
It's an important point for secondaries investors. So if you really want to show as a sponsor, if you really want to show strong alignment, it is strongly recommended to roll over at least 100% of your carried interests and top up as well.
Now, perhaps this next question could be a bit tricky to answer, and perhaps audience don't take this as legal advice, but maybe more of an expert opinion from a different perspective. Being in your seat, what would you say to an LP selling his portfolio to prepare for during purchase and sale and transfer document negotiations?
So I would ask the following questions. First, what do you want to sell? Is it because you're looking for liquidity? Are you over allocated to private equity, for instance, or do you want to rebalance your portfolio? Second question, what is it that you're selling? And are you selling a portfolio of LP interest in a sector where we still see big discounts? In that case, have you thought about alternatives to a sale, for instance, preferred equity? And then, are you a first-time seller or a repeat seller? So we see a lot of programmatic sellers who are actively using the secondaries market to rebalance their portfolio. But we also see first-time sellers, and in that case, there are concepts that are specific to secondaries, such as the purchase price adjustment, the concept of excluded obligations. I'm also thinking about ECI and withholding tax. All these points need to be properly addressed in the documentation. And also, I would say that as a seller, you need to start as early as you can to negotiate the underlying transfer documentation with the underlying GPs, because this could have an impact on your timing for completion. In terms of recent trends, We see sellers who are willing these days to accept a deferred purchase price. We also see sellers who do mosaic sales in order to achieve a higher purchase price. And my last question would be, have you thought about W&I Insurance? Because even though this is still relatively new in LP portfolio sales, it allows the seller to have a clean break. And for buyers, it can also give a buyer a competitive advantage in an auction process.
You're obviously very passionate about what you do, and I'd love to get to a little sort of rapid fire personal section, getting to know you just before we, jump off. What is your favorite part of your job?
Two things. First, I love working with my team. I joined Skadden with my two colleagues, Lawrence Hensworth and Aaron McPherson, and we just love working together. We've been working together for many years and we joined Skadden together. And then I love the creativity in this market. It's always innovating and you get to work on very interesting transactions very often before they even have a name.
This is true. Now, I'm very excited to actually hear your answer on this because from a deal lead or an advisory perspective, or both the buyer and the seller, I know the legal aspects of the transaction are sometimes their most feared parts. And so they like to offload it to obviously the experts and the professionals. But I'm curious, what is your least favorite part of your work, given that, you're probably working long hours and during holidays and all this, especially at quarter ends. But yeah, I'd love to hear kind of what is that part that kind of irks you a little bit?
Yeah, so Q4, for instance, tends to be the busiest time of the year. I remember vividly a couple of years ago, I was acting for the lead investors in a continuation fund. We had been working around the clock for several weeks, and we ended up signing at 4 a.m. on Christmas Day. It was tough for everyone, but hey, it's part of the job, and we all stayed up to make it happen.
Did you get to open presents in the morning?
Yes. When I was very tired.
Although your morning was probably like 11 a.m. by that time when you woke up. Um,
Exactly.
No, I can only imagine. I mean, all the quarter ends, and especially around Christmas and holidays, I see lawyers working just nonstop around the clock. So I can imagine that only be difficult. And thank you for doing that to make the transactions come to a head. Well, this has been a lovely chat, and you obviously bring such a wealth of experience to the market. And I'm always curious for women or individuals, doesn't matter, that are experienced in their field and have become really experts at what they do. There must have been some positive influence on you, or somebody that was a mentor, or somebody that helped you along the way. Was there anybody that stands out like that for you?
Yes. Jonathan Petal, he hired me in 2012 to do secondaries. He believed that secondaries required a combination of funds and M&A skills. And when you look at how the secondaries market has evolved over the last decade, I would say he was a visionary.
Yeah, it's probably one that you need to be really open to all sorts of creativity, as you mentioned, right? And with that background, it's helped you quite a bit. And maybe this is not so much a politically correct question, but what do you think then is the strength that women bring to secondary specifically, and deal execution? Is there any notable differences that you notice?
So I would say diversity benefits everyone because different people bring different approaches. There's still progress to be made, but over the years, I've had the privilege to work with amazing women in secondaries, and the next generation of women in secondaries is very good too.
I agree with you that different perspectives, whether it be different ethnicities or different genders or whatnot, just bring such a massive, important perspective to negotiations and to deal making, right? So that's awesome. And then last but not least, just from a rapid fire standpoint, if you were not a lawyer, what would you do?
I would be a pastry chef. I love Japan, so I would combine French and Japanese influences. Maybe in my next life.
Maybe if you do end up doing that as a hobby, I'll finally visit France and then also UK to see you and learn and have a taste.
Definitely.
Now, you've obviously earned a tremendous amount of accolades over your career to date. And as I mentioned in the beginning, and given the rise of secondaries, I'm sure you'll be a massive driver for the success of Skadden going forward and the secondary market transaction successes globally in general. But before we hop off, I'd love to hear perhaps some short commentary on the growth of Skadden secondaries line of business as well. Can you talk how that came about?
Yeah, so at Skadden, we are a dedicated team of funds and M&A secondaries lawyers, as we believe that secondaries require a multidisciplinary approach and a combination and a close collaboration between funds and M&A practices. As the secondaries market continues to evolve, we are very excited to have joined Skadden, which is a top-tier law firm with market-leading M&A funds and tax capabilities. And together we combine our expertise to deliver best-in-class advice to our clients.
That's awesome, and I think given the global reach that you guys have, it's only going to continue to grow. And I'm excited for what you're going to bring to the market. And I want to thank you for taking the time to chat with me today and really share your lens of experience and expertise on perhaps one of the most complicated parts of the secondary market, and especially sharing the history of how you've seen the legal framework in this market evolve from its nascency. And I hope our listeners walked away with a better understanding of, the high level of expertise it takes to operate in that space. And we can't wait to see which deal we will see you lead next. And once again, this has been Delphine Jaugey, Head of Secondaries for Europe and Counsel in the Investment Management Group at Skadden. And thank you so much for joining us, Delphine.
Thank you for having me.
And as always, watch the Secondary Link LinkedIn page for updates on our next special guest, and we hope to see you in a few weeks where we highlight the next incredible woman on the Women of Secondaries.